At San Francisco International Airport, 4 aircrafts full of passengers were waiting for their turn to take off in the darkness of the night when they noticed that a plane was moving fast towards them to land. It asked ATC for permission to land, and ATC granted it permission. At first, the pilots of all the 4 planes thought that it was a misunderstanding and that the plane would come closer and align itself with the empty runway. But it was not at all as they were thinking. The plane that was to land was not going to land anywhere else, but was going to directly collide with all the 4 aircraft. Once again, bring cheers to the audience. This horrifying incident is not very old when on 7th July 2017, Air Canada's plane ACA-759 took off from Toronto Pearson International Airport with 135 passengers and 5 crew members. It was a routine flight which was to land at San Francisco International Airport in 5 hours and 30 minutes. Both the pilots were quite experienced and had landed at San Francisco Airport many times before, but today was not a normal day for them at all, and it was going to become an example for the aviation industry in the coming times. The whole journey went perfectly, and when Air Canada 759 reached near San Francisco, they started making their position for landing. For this, they started waiting for the permission of the air traffic control tower. Let us tell you here that there are total 4 runways at San Francisco Airport, but only 2 can be operated at a time. If the wind direction comes from the south, then both these runways are open for landing and takeoff. And if the wind is coming from the west, then both these runways are open for landing and takeoff. Then these 2 runways are used. We all know that the plane has to take off or land against the wind. Today, the wind was blowing from the west. That is why one of these runways had to be used to land the plane against the wind. That is 28A and 28R. That is 28 left and right. Everything that was going on normally till now started going wrong. Runway 28L was closed for maintenance, and because of this, its lights were also off. The control tower gave permission to Air Canada 759 to land on the adjacent runway 28A because both the pilots had landed at this airport many times before. That is why they were expecting that they would see 2 parallel lights of the runway, out of which they had to see the right runway. They have to land, and this is where they made their first mistake. There are 2 taxiways on the sides of both these runways, which are colored green. After loading passengers from the terminal, the planes come to the runway through these taxiways only. But due to the darkness of the night, the pilots of Air Canada 759 mistook the taxiway lights for 28R, and the lights which were actually of 28R were being mistaken for 28L. But the danger, which was even bigger than this, was not known to the pilots till now. Yes, on the right taxiway, 4 fully loaded planes were waiting for their turn to take off. 3 were planes of United One Airlines, and 1 was of Philippine Airlines. There were a total of more than 1,000 passengers in all these 4, and the fuel was also fully loaded in them. There was only 100 meters of space between runway 28A and the taxiway. The gap is when Air Canada 759 aligned itself with the taxiway, it was very difficult to guess from the control tower far away where it was actually going to land. Now, the biggest question arises here that if runways being closed for maintenance is a normal thing, then why was this thing not told to the pilot of Air Canada 759? Because if they had known about this, then this confusion would not have happened at all. The information about the closure of runway 28 lift was mentioned in the no means notice, i.e. notices to air missions. These are such notices in which all the information about the flight from takeoff to landing is written in huacho lines. And in reality, it is not so easy to point out the important notices among them. That is why the notice about the closure of runway 28 lift was missed late, and this was their second big mistake. The Air Canada 759 was moving fast towards the runway, i.e. taxiway. The control tower had given them permission to land through visual approach, which means that they have to find the runway themselves and line up the plane with the runway manually. Normally, when the weather is good, permission is given for visual approach only. But because many such accidents have happened in the past in which pilots are not able to judge properly in visual approach and land somewhere else, that is why most of the pilots take the help of instrument guidance system during visual approach also. This instrument guidance system tells the pilot till the end whether he is landing on the right runway or not. To activate this system, the runway number has to be added in it. although nowadays modern aircrafts activate the guidance system on their own. But because this was an Airbus A320 in which the guidance system had to be activated manually, which the pilot did not do for some reason, and this was the third big mistake of the pilot. But why were the pilots making mistakes one after the other? In fact, it was a very big day for both the pilots. It was 11:05 p.m. at this time, and both of them had not taken any special rest for the last 19 hours. Both of them were Canadian pilots, and at that time, the Canadian pilots' fatigue rules were not followed.
We pointed out 3 mistakes of the Air Canada 759 pilot. But what about those 4 planes that were seeing that the Air Canada plane was not heading towards the runway, but towards the taxiway, and still were not informing the control tower? Actually, everyone knew that during visual approach at San Francisco Airport, the plane has to be brought a little more from the right side. Because if the plane comes in line with 28R, then it will have to pass over the faster city area of San Francisco. To avoid noise pollution over the population, the pilots come closer to the runway and align themselves. This was a normal thing for the pilots of the 4 parked planes. That is why no one reported it to the control tower. But when the Air Canada plane came even closer and aligned itself with 28R, when the plane did not do so, the Philippine Airlines turned on its landing lights as a precaution, so that the plane landing could see that 4 planes were already parked there. The pilots of Air Canada 759 saw some lights on the taxiway, which they thought was 28A. The pilots did not find anything right, and they immediately sent a radio message to the control tower. The control tower immediately replied to them that there was no one on 28R and it was completely empty. You have permission to land. Actually, the control tower was also unaware that they were going to land not on 28A, but on the taxiway. Normally, there is another controller for this situation, who monitors the traffic on the ground. But because it was the time of night when there was not much traffic, only one controller could do all this. Luckily, the pilots standing in the waiting land plane were able to hear this conversation between Air Canada and the control tower. They too were not able to understand why Air Canada was not aligned with the runway, even after reaching so close. Now, only a few seconds were left. The pilot standing in the waiting land plane was seeing his death in front of him. He was confirmed that Air Canada was considering the taxiway as the runway. The pilot of United One standing in the front immediately sent this message to the control tower without telling his call sign. In response, the control tower immediately relayed a message of go around to Air Canada. By the time Air Canada got this message, it was just a few feet above the 3rd plane standing in the line. Luckily, they reacted immediately and gained the altitude back by raising the lever. If there was a delay of just 1 more second, what you just saw would have happened. This is called the biggest accident in the history of aviation. 1,000 passengers were sitting in the parked planes, and 1,335 passengers were in Air Canada.
All these planes were fully loaded with fuel, and it would have been very difficult to control what happened. After this incident, a full investigation was done in which it was proved that the pilots of Air Canada 759 were at fault, because they neither activated the instrument guidance system nor read the notes mentioned on the notice. Apart from this, the National Transportation Safety Board made new rules for San Francisco Airport, in which when one runway is closed, visual approach will not be allowed. Along with this, in off-peak hours, along with air traffic, the presence of ground traffic controller was also made mandatory. It is expected that you will like and share this video of World Trending Wave to your heart's content. Thank you so much for your love-filled comments.